If you're an agent trying to grow your business, this episode is for you. I'm joined by Matt Giggs, who's a hugely experienced estate agent who's built his own agency brand from the ground up. We talk about how to get your first lead, what really wins instructions, and the best lessons Matt's learned from decades in the industry. No fluff, just honest, practical advice to help you grow. Hope you enjoy the episode. Matt, welcome to the podcast. So, you're very well known in the estate agency space, to say the least. So, for those people that don't know you at all, talk me through how you first got into estate agency.
Well, thanks for having me on. First of all, Chris, it's nice to be on your show. So I started in the mid-90s as a trainee. So I didn't have a driving license. That was my start at Taylor's Countrywide, where I live in St Neots. Had 3 months to pass my test, managed to do it, borrowed a loan off my area director to get a car, and the rest is kind of like on from there, really. And became a senior neg, then went into an independent, came back to Taylor's, and then worked my way up the corporate ladder. Sort of senior branch manager, branch partner, area manager, all of the stuff. Got to end sort of close to MD, but realized MD wasn't what I actually wanted to do, which might resonate with some of your listeners because I think what we've all realized is that actually you can be a great estate agent, but do you really want to be a great area manager and take some of the fun away from what you actually enjoy doing? So it really took me about 16 years to figure that out in Countrywide, which again, I learned a lot, but the biggest lesson was actually I don't really want to do it this way. This isn't really how I think estate agency should be done. So I opened up Gigs& Co, my first estate agency business in May 2012. And yeah, we've got about several estate agencies now under the brand, mainly with business partners. But in that period of time of doing that, with my background of mentoring and training agents, I decided about 10 years ago to do that alongside my business's growth. So I help agents to come and start their careers with us, and hopefully they become a partner or, maybe a self-employed agent or a limited company business owner. And I work with business owners outside of my company as well. So I work with agents around the country, which, you know, that's just been amazing. I've loved that because you get to work in all sorts of different ways with different people, different challenges. But the most important things in our industry always tend to come back down to the one thing, which is your mindset, really, in the nicest possible way. That's like the bit that gives the other things the leverage. So, yeah, I've worked a lot on that over the years personally and professionally. It's helped, and then I've got to this place where sitting on a call with you now, really, and just recently launched the Estate Agent Showdown podcast, and that's been brilliant. And love chatting to agents like yourself and people in the industry, and hearing stuff which I can learn from. So, yeah, continuing on that journey, really.
Amazing. So talk me through. You mentioned that you went from a corporate agency with Taylors to then an independent estate agency, then back to the corporate world. What made you do that zigzag? Was it purely
Well, it
the
was.
company car and the money, or what was the reason for the zigzag there?
Well, I was on a 6 grand basic. I got my driving license. Got the 8 grand basic, which was a winner. But actually, I was playing football, and that was really disrupted working in the corporate side because every Saturday I was, and Sundays back then, you were expected to work. And if I'm honest, someone who I played football with had an estate agency of his own in Bedford, and he kept tapping me up and said, "Look, you should come and work for us. You can have every Saturday off, Saturday afternoon, and I'll offer you this." We offered me more money and the opportunity to play football. So really greedily, I thought that's a great idea. Went to Bedford. Bedford's huge. If you don't know it, compared to where I was working in Market Towns, Bedford was a bit of a beast. Very multicultural, very, 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 very much thrown in the deep end. Classic situation of, have you listed houses before? Yeah, of course I have. Hadn't. I remember I done my first valuation. It was an absolute disaster. And yeah, I kind of needed that, really, because I think when I was working at Countrywide at the time, there was certainly a lot of experience around me, but there weren't the opportunities to get the experience, if that makes sense. So that was the main reason. But when I got to the company, it was at the end of the football season, and I started working weekends because that's where the sales happened. And it went so well that the guy was like, "Are you sure you want to play football?" And in the end, it just materialized that the football thing wasn't going to happen even under our new agreement. And 2 years later, I went back and worked in Countrywide as an assistant manager or something along those lines. And yeah, that was my stint in independent estate agency for a family company, which was a bit eye-opening compared to the corporate world. But again, I got, those were the lessons really. There was some great people in there. There was a lot more freedom, and they really did build relationships with their clients, and that was quite interesting to see in comparison to more like the scripty kind of approach to estate agency. And it's funny actually just talking about this. Sorry to segue, but I helped a lady not long ago get into a. She came to me at the start of the year asking if I could help her get into a estate agency. She'd been trying for 6 months, and we'd done some work together. And within 4 weeks, she's got 3 offers. But she was very new; she had never done it before. But she's super service orientated, loves helping people. And I caught up with her yesterday, and she was telling me all about the first few months, and it just reminded me of my first few months in corporate estate agency, which in some ways is really good, but also I think what I was trying to explain to her was there was the client centric approach, which I feel independence. Um, the principles seem to be more around that in the independent sector, and the corporate centric approach, which is the business model is to make money and to obviously make money on the add-ons, the mortgage services, conveyancing, and so on and so forth. So hearing that from her was just a bit of a reiteration of what we heard on Panorama just a few weeks ago. But it was quite interesting. But yeah, I flipped and flopped back into Countrywide. I owe a lot to them for the career path that I went on, and a lot of those disciplines and I'd say the work ethic is kind of that was drilled into me, I suppose. I think when you enjoy something, it genuinely doesn't feel like work, as cheesy as that sounds. And I didn't really mind the hours, and I got a lot from it. I got well rewarded, well looked after. But towards the end, it was just not for me. It really wasn't, and it was paramount from about 2012. Sorry, from about 2010, when I got those sinking feelings of not feeling that I was in the right place, that it took me a couple of years to really figure out what that place looked like, which was to go and do it alone.
So you didn't fancy becoming the king of the spreadsheets then at Countrywide. So you decided to then go out. You decided to obviously go and launch your own business from there. What you obviously you go out and you've gone from this kind of corporate machine where obviously you've not been on the front line for the last however long, and obviously you're in a large corporate machine. The phone just rings because you've been on the high street for forever, sort of thing. How do you go about from sort of having a diary, which I'm sure was at that time was absolutely packed out with meetings and various regional meetings, etc., to then go through, right, I've started my business now. My diary is quite literally blank. Right, how do we fill this up then?
That's such a great question, and something it's really etched in my mind about what that first, I'd say, 3 months looked like, because I was leaving a really big salary, a lot of security. We just had our first child was over a year old. We were planning to have another one, and there's never really a right time to do it. And the reason why I did it is because I just firmly didn't believe in the approach that we were taking in that organization compared to, I mean, I nearly left the industry. It was either leave the industry or do it myself. And the do it yourself way of going into it was a case of, do you back yourself really? So to back yourself, you have to do things that are going to be what you believe in. And I think generally speaking, I figured out in my last 12 months of Countrywide of what do clients really want and need? Um, what do they hate? Do the opposite, and build a service and principles around those things. So it was really easy to have conversations with friends, family, people in the community 2, 3 months before I launched, messaging people, just saying, just start to let you know, I'm going to be launching my own estate agency. I had to be really careful. That was only really done within a few weeks of launch, that part, because of the notice period that I had to give and my bonus and so on and so forth. But that's another podcast story what happened there. But I got into the marketplace by speaking to people, telling people what I did, what I was doing, why I was doing it, and what was going to be different about how we took our approach. We chose a brand which was black and white. So the slogan, if you like, was black and white, no grey areas. And weirdly enough, I remember speaking to people about moving home, and obviously we had no presence anywhere. We were in a very small office which no one could find, 2.5 miles from the high street. And it was really about going through my network and making sure that the people that kind of know me were able to recommend me, that kind of thing, and really build up a lot of community, I suppose, partnerships, if you like. So I've done a lot of work on social media in the early days, and I wasn't on social media when I launched, so I had no followers, no platform. I entered it with trepidation and a real clear sense of not knowing what the impact was, because I had to have a company Facebook page, but to have that, I had to have my own Facebook account. So I was on my own Facebook account, taking the mickey out of Tottenham Hotspurs and all sorts of things, and having dialogue with friends. And then in the next post, I'm talking about our business, and then the next one, I'm posting these stupid jokes or whatever it is. And I really didn't have a clue where these things were going. And I don't even know back then whether you could see the reach. But what really quickly transpired was that people started to know what I was doing, why I was doing it, how we were doing. Because I'll do, embarrassingly enough, for anyone watching this, just pop on Gigs and Co. YouTube videos, Matt Gigs. You'll see some from May 2012, June 2012, where I was doing property market updates. And it looked like I was reading the news. I was in my tie, as corporate Matt in his own business. And but that network that you've got, and I think, looking back, it was really using the time that I had to spread the word and the mission that I was on. Estate agents weren't, and probably still aren't, particularly well liked. So doing everything in the opposite direction of what estate agents tended to be known for was my general approach. So being black and white, straight down the line. If you want to know how to sell your house, I'll go through it with you. If you want me to tell you what you want to hear, we're probably not right to work for each other. It was that empowerment of being able to do that in my own company, in comparison to, you need to get the listing, which, was definitely, looking back now, such a great way of starting the business. And just to touch on that, sorry, Chris, just quickly, but what's interesting, when you build a business and it's successful and you get lots of traction, you end up going away from some of those principles. And there was definitely some of that later down the line, because when you're hiring a lot more people, you're spending a lot more money. So the importance of volume becomes really important to the business. And then you start to take clients on that you wouldn't necessarily have took on in those earlier years, and probably more recently in the last year or two. So yeah, the journey started there really, and that's just work your network.
And if you could go back and speak to sort of younger Matt when you were first launching the business, what would you slap them around the face and say, either don't do this or focus on this more?
Well, we focus very much on families. So we sponsored sports teams. We entered the schools, sponsored prospectuses in the local schools. We offered referral fees, all of those kind of things to parents. So we were visible in what we would consider to be the family area of St. Neots. And that was obviously because, most families are going to need to sell a house to buy another home. So we were quite keen to maybe act on or help on two sides of that coin. I think what happens further down the line, so if I could go back, is to stick to that plan, and use what I would consider to be the statistics, the stories, the influence that we had in that market. We've never had, I know market share is not a benchmark, but we had a 40% market share of the detached houses in the first 12 months of sold. And I would say it's probably only like 15% now, or 20%. Um, I look back and we were just so clearly in that space, you know. Um, And I think you get distracted. One of my biggest challenges I face day to day is to stay on track. It's to stay focused on who do I want to work with, whether it's a coaching client. You probably know yourself, Chris, you get clients that they want your help, but they don't want to do what's required. And, that's really draining as a coach or a mentor. And you're not actually helping them, because ultimately, if they're not willing to take responsibility and be held accountable, then the chances are they're not going to make the decisions or take the actions that they need to take. And in business, it's no different. If you become a scattergun, which I think I've done over the years, and you get lots of different things that sound really interesting. And as many things I've said no to, I said yes to. But it was I had this mindset of saying yes to things and then figuring it out. But actually, you should just say yes to things that are in line with your goals, and stay focused on what those things look like. Get better at what your niche is. So if I was to go back and start again, I think the niche would just be double, triple, quadruple down on, and not actually going around the houses trying to be the kingpin in the premium market, sell every flat that's available. It's just work on the market that you should be working in.
Yeah, it's kind of that whole one avatar, one client, $1 million, isn't it? Sort of angle of it. So I think that that's certainly a thing that people get. I see a lot in many businesses where they kind of start off and they're kind of a bit different, and they're kind of I do this, I do socials, I do blogs, and I do all this kind of fun stuff in a business that kind of makes me unique. And then you kind of look at them in 3-4 years time, and they're just kind of like they're just like a team. They're basically just Connells, but a bit smaller sort of thing. They kind of dilute down that sort of owner magic as more and more people come in the business, and they kind of just dilute the proposition until they're just like another high street agent sometimes.
Yeah, I think when we were in the first few years, when we'd hire people, they would meet myself, my wife, the team. It was very much a feel of togetherness. And I think as I sort of became further away from the business, and this isn't taking the credit, it's my fault that we started hiring people for the roles and the jobs, so not the vision or the mission. It was less discussed about the black and white. It was less discussed about who our ideal clients were. It was less discussed on the approach, and reinforced on the approach that we must have, and why those little things matter, and how you do anything is how you do everything. So you kind of then start to, like, you've just hit the nail on the head. You become an independent version of Connells or something like that, which is, it's not to knock Connells, but that wasn't what I set out to do in the first place. So why the freaking hell did I do it? So
Right.
yeah.
So looking across the board now, when you look at sort of other agents online, or meet them in person, for example, what lead generation method do you think is sort of underused and underutilized by agents today, that actually, if they kind of not saw the light, but kind of put a bit more effort into it, kind of it would reward them more heavily?
And when I speak to agents, and if their challenge is they haven't got enough vendors or they're not getting enough valuations, the first place I tend to start with is by asking them, what's, yesterday, what did you do around that? And what were the kind of actions that you took yesterday to build that up? Now, there's long term, medium term, and short term efforts that will help you consistently build that stronger level of attraction and valuations. But you know, what's interesting, when you go back over the last 7 days, very few people that I speak to have actually said, "Well, I've had these conversations." They love painting the office, making sure the website looks nice, or putting some ads on social media, or making sure that the video was great and they looked great and the content was great. Um, thing is that this is a people business, and if I'm going to take something out of the corporate world, it was encouraged that you spoke to people. And I know people say now, this is an interesting one. Well, they don't have time to talk. They don't want to talk. They don't, if you've got nothing to say. If you've got nothing to say, nothing to share, which is of relevance or of any benefit, then they will not talk to you, right? But if you've got something of interest, of relevance, of help, which could help them significantly, there aren't many people that wouldn't want to have a conversation. So, my belief is that all of those other nice things are just the consistencies which you can probably outsource, but you can't outsource Chris's conversation with someone. That's where the independence comes in. That's where the magic happens. That's where the nuances change. And actually, again, if I speak to those agents and talk about some of the sales that they've got agreed. And often or not, it may have been something that they said in a conversation or something that they did to educate that client that made the difference, yet they're not doing it as part of their lead gen. So, you know, for me, your network, your community needs to know you. You need to be helping them, informing them, staying relevant, whether it's online or offline. Offline means you need to be in their WhatsApps. You need to be on the tip of their tongue when it comes to any questions about their moving situation. And even today, and though I've not really worked the front line consistently for quite a number of years, I've done periods in it. And I think you have to go out of your way. You have to go out of your way to help people. You have to go out of your way to give them things that they need, which are going to help them. And you have to be able to block that kind of time out in your day to ensure that it's a consistent, measurable approach. It's the last thing agents want to do these days. So that should be your first thing, because most are on social media. Most do it okay. Lots don't do it particularly well, but most don't even talk to people now. Like years ago, Chris, how long have you been in a estate agency for?
Long enough that I'm wrinkly enough for it. I started when I was 18, so it must be 21 years now.
So about 21 years ago, if you were speaking to people, you would sometimes hear from clients, oh God, I've just had, they're getting bombarded with people trying to call them and speak to them. Nowadays, it's a bit of a novelty, I think, for clients. Um, so actually, you're not interrupting them. You're showing them that you actually want to help. If you're ringing them up with bullshit statements and just saying, oh, how's it going or whatever, that's just going to interrupt their day. But if you've got some better ways of approaching them and you learn um, which ways work for most people, which is normally directed around their outcome, then you're in a really sweet spot. I mean, it helped me before I launched. It helped me after I launched. It helped me in the first 2 to 3 years. We scaled the business really fast in that period, and then you take your foot off of that particular area of the gas, and then you start relying on the brand, and then you start relying on leads coming in, and that's all well and good, but it's a competitive landscape. So you've got to do what your competitors aren't willing to do. And I think it's being in the places that you want to be talking to your customers, and being in front of them, being around them, being there for them.
I suppose that's probably boils down to making yourself sort of a marketplace of one, as opposed to, turning on evaluation, names in a hat, let's kind of, all agents are the same, this bang on right move sort of thing. Where actually, if you've been the person sort of offering value, with no expectations coming back for the last 6 months, year, 18 months, how long they've been kind of following you and connecting with you, you actually,
Yeah.
you're yours to lose then.
Well, whoever's watching this, if I said to you, and let's say you're viewing this and you're listening to this conversation, how many local potential owners did you have conversations with yesterday? I wonder what the answer is. Now, they're not going to tell us because they're not on the call, but I'd say it was it's, um, late single figures. But, you know, it's not just about doing it for one day. It's about doing it consistently every day. And the approach to take in that moment isn't to try and get something. It's what can I provide? What can I give? What can I add in terms of value? So it's a bit like anything that if you work at it consistently over time, the benefits will yield. Now you will get short-term wins in that area, and you'll do that by getting better at having those conversations. But further down the line, I mean, just this week, there was I was in the office about 6 months ago, and this couple they've got 4 properties around Brighton and Southampton that they own. They were just up, they popped in, and I happened to literally walk in the door at the same time, and I sat down with him. And I do enjoy those little moments every now and then. Um, and I obviously made an impression on them because they phoned my mobile 6 months later and said, "You mentioned you had a contact in Brighton. Um, we want to sell two apartments there." And you know, that's because I gave them time. That's because I listened to them. And I think when you're in an estate agency, we talk about know, like, trust. Well, the best way to build know, like, trust is to give people time. It's to listen. It's to show some kind of empathy and understanding about where they are and what they want to achieve. And then it's a case of making recommendations and solutions that will meet their outcome. And estate agency is a really simple thing that's been overcomplicated vastly by the amount of distractions that we all face day to day. And as a business owner, you are bombarded with tech, bombarded with solutions, bombarded with um, problems that aren't even problems, And the biggest problem estate agents I find have today is they're not good enough in those conversations. They're not actually having them because they're not good enough. They're not good enough because they don't have them. So it's this vicious cycle of not being confident at what you do because you just don't do it. So if you don't just turn up at the gym and lift 110 kilograms, you start with 60 or whatever, and you work your way up. It's no different in conversations. You've got to strengthen that muscle. And I think estate agents should be following likes of yourself, listening to that content and looking out for how best to engage with people in their localized areas and being the person in their community that is, like you say, they're the only one to use.
You think that, so I know Simon Ledbetter talks about this quite a lot, and I've seen his stats to back this up. And at any one time, about 5% of the marketplace is actually thinking about moving and selling and kind of considering that sort of stuff. Whereas I think lots of agents fight quite heavily over that 5%. Do you want a valuation today and do you want to move by tomorrow?
Yeah.
Do you think agents are sort of missing a trick by actually not sort of warming up / focusing on that 95% instead of just blindly looking at that 5%?
Yeah, I mean, if you look over 5 years, that's 25%. If you really sort of think about it, but that I think when you certainly worked in the corporate world, it is about the here and now. To this week's result, can I sell a? It's very much in that focus area, and I think that triggers and gears a lot of people up around thinking short term. I think if you've got your own business or you're self-employed, there's a lot of pressure to think short term because you've got to get the bills paid at the end of the day, and there's a lot of pressure to do that. So the short term, medium term, term activities in this particular area, by being the go to, the person that people see, the people that they visibly understand your messaging and what you stand for, you're starting to then penetrate that market that you want to attract and serve. So yeah, look, consistency is important, and I think it's a word that's bandied around a lot. And I think we're a fairly inconsistent industry as a whole. I think there's an element, like I said, where people want to get the business. They don't want to give the people in their marketplace enough of what they need. And I think that's the approach to have. And that will yield you more success in sort of 2, 3 years down the line.
Mm. So let's talk about growth of agencies. You've segued me beautifully there. Thank you very much. So if you were a one-person band listening to this and you have had a fairly successful first 6 months, year, 18 months, wherever it may be, but you were thinking to yourself, my God, I'm busy. I am working those Saturdays. I can't play my football and I'm all over the show. What would be the next thing to look at with regard to kind of lightening the load on yourself and sort of outsourcing that business so you can kind of have a little bit more freedom or at least some sort of relative work-life balance?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I find when people get really busy, and it's easy to get really busy, especially when there's a lot of administration responsibilities these days for agents, unlike there probably was 15, 20 years ago. So you have to look at your pounds per hour. What are you doing? Where are you spending your time? Is it 80% in your field of strength? Are you playing to your A game, or are you playing 50% of the time in your D and C game? So the first place is to outsource the things that cost the least. Um, AML, um, administration. You could be outsourcing sales progression. You could be outsourcing lead generation in terms of Facebook marketing. You know, they're all of the things I've got absolutely no interest in because a great estate agent is great in conversations. So as an A player, my A game is in conversation. It's not doing editing. It's not producing a leaflet. It's not signing off a file which I'm going to get exchanged. It's none of that. Right? None of that. If there's a problem in a cell, yeah, obviously I'll get involved. But ultimately, you outsource your admin, outsource your B's and C's and D's. So you create that space, and then with the space that you've got, you put your priorities into your schedule. I genuinely think that agents should probably be looking around 2 or 3 areas of consistent daily attention, prioritizing what they need to be doing to stay consistent in the areas of being in conversation. So it could be working with your existing vendors, prospecting new own to sell clients, producing content, which is going to be the long term part of those three elements. So really staying in your high priority areas, don't get tempted with your time to stop playing in your A game.
Mm.
And I think this is what happens. You go, oh, look, I'm going to go and hire someone to come and do the viewings. Okay. And more often than not, that person has not had the training. In fact, this lady I spoke to yesterday, she said to me she wants to improve her results, yet she's not been shown how to conduct viewings.
Hmm.
And she's done over 100 viewing appointments in the first 3 months. So, for me, there are lots of things that can come out of a viewing other than a sale, you know. So you've got to be at your A game. Don't replace your A game with D players, right? You have to make sure that you create the space by taking away all of the distractions that you're not so good at, where your energy gets lost. So you increase your hours on the areas that you're strong at. That will take prioritization. Then, once you feel you're expanding into those areas and that you're able to scale more, I genuinely believe that um, with anyone you hire first, you make it really clear as a self-employed agent that this is, you don't lie to them about how tough this is going to be. You bring them in under the pretenses of how challenging it's going to be, and that they're going to write the processes for you, because you'll be teaching them the processes. They should be writing them up. You're going to teach them the way to do it. They should be writing them up. You've always got to think about how do you not only solidify growth through people, it's making sure that the people that you bring in have that in alignment with you. So they're the kind of people that are gonna share what's important about your business, which has made you successful to get to the point that you're at. So it could be X, Y, and Z. So they're the key values or the things that are really important. So these are the things we can't compromise on. And then this skills element. I always believe that when people observe, they should be making notes. I think it solidifies what they're learning. And you can actually learn more by watching and doing rather than sitting in a room. I think they're the areas that I'd be looking to scale. So outsourcing and automation and leveraging through those kind of means, I think it's a lot easier today than it was 10 years ago. And I honestly believe that that's what you should be doing, because your CRM, your admin, all of the functions should be geared around giving you more time with a customer. So that's got to be your A game. I mean, I don't see many people that are in sales that get to that point of doing really well who are crap at that A game. What they end up doing is diluting their A game when they start hiring people.
Mm. And how do you personally manage your sort of, I don't like the expression work-life balance, but it's an easy way to describe it. Because obviously you've got, businesses, you've got the coaching side of things, I'm sure your phone pings a lot in the morning and in the evening, wherever it may be. How do you personally manage your time now compared to when you first started? Are you strict now and go like, past 7 o'clock, my phone goes in airplane mode, or are you happy to take calls at night? How do you sort of balance your life?
Yeah, I haven't took calls at night for a very, very long time. If I, when I was back in the business between August and September last year, I made it my mission to go out and complete 50 valuations a month alongside running everything else. Um, and I burnt out because I didn't make certain um, commitments to myself. My main focus was to get the results, to build those relationships, and to make sure that I led by example. So I didn't factor in that at 6 in the morning, you ought to just have a bit of space. I was on the laptop, 9 o'clock at night. I was getting details put together and trying to just lead by example. But generally speaking, now with the businesses that I've got, the directors and partners that I've got around me, and the teams will manage all of the calls, the emails, the WhatsApps, and everything else. So I don't tend to get heavily involved in those areas. So a lot of the stuff that I do, I only coach up to 5 one-to-one clients. the podcast's probably taken up more time than that. As you probably know, organising people, guests, and I'm trying to do the one where you've got two guests coming here, and you're on a make sure.
You're a brave man. A few people in one podcast, one go. It's like, trying to organise, ships in the night on that one, I'd imagine.
And it's also trying to get them to Peterborough, which is like not the most attractive place to go. Not knocking Peterborough, but it's not like London. Come into London, we'll have lunch. But it's also trying to get two people with different opinions. So there's a lot of work that I've put into that in the last sort of 4 or 5 months. But time management, and it's a banded around subject. I think there's elements where during a week you do have more space and you do need to rest. I think for me, what works is I like to start work earlier, and I like to, towards the end of the day, unwind. That that works for me better. Um, so I think if you've got your personal priorities in line with what works for you, great. For some people, it might be starting at 10 o'clock in the morning, and they get the gym, they get the time, they get that space, they get to plan, they journal. Great. For me, I get up, I like to get on, and I don't like to hang about. I like to almost get on top of the day before it starts. I like to feel like I'm winning um, very early on in the day. But managing all those things is really just having people that take those responsibilities, and the operational side, especially, keep me as far away from that as possible.
Yeah. So one final question for you, Matt. So for anyone who's listening to this who feels like they're doing everything right, but not seeing the results they think they should be getting in their business right now, what would you say to those people?
Well, I think the first thing is that's a really dangerous mindset. Um, you go and speak to the top professionals in any sport, and I liken sport mindset to business mindset. If you spoke to a top business person, like let's take Ormozy, those kind of influency type, I can't imagine them ever saying they're doing everything right. So the first thing is you need to check in on yourself, and also find yourself an accountability partner. So in other words, someone that's not going to lie to you, someone that's going to hold you accountable with good intentions. But don't get that person unless you're holding yourself accountable. So that would be my advice. Don't don't make excuses for yourself. Chris, when we hear listers say, yeah, I lost that one. And then you say, oh, how come what happened there? What's the normal reason for why they lose it, Chris?
Oh, it was the fee.
It's free. And actually, my best question after that is, well, have you ever won any ones at a higher fee than the other agents? And they say yes. And say, so is it different for that one, but for this one. So once you bring them back into responsibility taking and that everything's your fault, and that's not to give yourself a hard time or make yourself feel down, it's that you don't, you can't grow unless you see the opportunity for growth. You can't. So if your mindset is to constantly reassure you that you are doing everything right, you are a really, really tricky place. Like, I'm very aware of the things that I should be doing better right now. So I've got to try and chalk those things off. One of the things I said earlier on in the pod is I take on too many things. So in the last 12 months, I've had to reduce down my interests, whether they're partnerships, directorships, because the real baby for me is my gigs group, right? So the real baby in that is Gigs and Co. When I first started, that has to be a higher priority moving forward. And we're restructuring in a way which will mean we attract sort of high caliber agents, and we're going to put training and growth in there as a key pillar. And there's all sorts of things, but more often than not, if you start to think that you're able to improve, you'll improve. You'll seek improvements. You'll look at things more objectively. And I think that's the first place I would start.
Amazing, Matt. You've been an absolutely brilliant guest. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks, Chris.